Hey, welcome to Pilot Lounge. I'm Paul Harrop. We're coming to you from my study, and joining us over the internet is Melissa Rudinger, the Executive Director of the AOPA Foundation. Hey, Melissa, how's it going?
Hey Paul, how are you?
I'm good. I'm holding down the fort here. How's everything in your world?
Same here. Been at home for over a month, but everybody's working really hard from home, and it actually seems to work well.
Good, good, good. Well, Pilot Lounge, we kind of talk about people's flying, and I think you have one of the more unique flying backgrounds of anyone I know. I think you are one of the coolest pilots I know because you flew balloons. Tell me, how did you get started in aviation, and how did you find your way into ballooning?
So, unlike a lot of folks that get into aviation, I didn't have a natural passion at first. Nobody in my family flew, so there was no flying, just wasn't in my vocabulary. But there was an Explorer post at my parents' church that was an aviation Explorer post. And frankly, I was a teenager in high school, and I was more interested perhaps in the boys that were in the post at first. That pivoted pretty quickly because the post somebody had donated a hot air balloon. It was actually a defense contractor. And I don't know the circumstances of how that came to be, but I happened to come in when the balloon was donated. And there was a competition that announced that anybody who passes, the first person in the troop to pass the written test gets to learn to fly for free, but then we have to pay it forward. So I was 17 at that time and went and took the test, was one of the first people to pass, went on to get my commercial pilot certificate, and then I took over flying that balloon, as well as teaching the next scout to fly, and eventually started a balloon business. Was a Cameron balloon dealer, had a repair station, and I did that part-time for 7 years. I actually used that income to work my way through college. I sold my college a balloon that I then got a contract to fly. So I was kind of a hustler in the balloon world. I also got into flying competitively. I was part of a circuit, and actually in 1990 qualified for the World Cup in Saga, Japan. And that was kind of the apex of my ballooning career. After 7 years, I was ready to move on to other things. And also during that time, I learned to fly fixed wing. I got a job at the airport part time, and that's really how I literally drifted into aviation.
Well, I'd say an apex being at the World Championship is a pretty good high point for you. So that's it's really incredible. How does it compare to fixed wing? I mean, the aeronautical things are all still the same, but the flight controls, the wind, I think you're probably more reliant on wind in a balloon than we are in fixed wing. How do the two compare?
So they're surprisingly, people are surprised when I say this. I think it's a lot more of an art. Obviously, there's science with balloons. I get it. But it really is more like sailing, and that you're really sailing the winds. And so in many ways, it's harder than flying fixed wing. Fixed wing, you put input into the aircraft, and it does what it's supposed to do. With a balloon, it's much more nuanced. There's a delay. You kind of just have to learn how, and it changes depending on the ambient air temperature and the load in the balloon. And so for me, I think it provided a really good foundation, first of all, for understanding weather, because you're way more weather dependent in a balloon. You can't turn around and just go back to the airport if you run into trouble. So you really have to understand weather and weather patterns. And then I think it gives you better stick and rudder skills, believe it or not, just because you're so in tune with your aircraft when you're flying a balloon. So I think it's a great foundation to go from fixed wing, or from hot air to fixed wing.
That's incredible. I'm not sure how many people have taken that path. I think a lot of pilots, myself included, would love to get the rating someday. But that's neat that that was where you started. And so you put yourself through college with ballooning, and then after college, you came to AOPA a couple years back. Tell us how your track with AOPA went, and how it led you to where you are today.
Sure. So much like my ballooning, I kind of fell into the job at AOPA as well. I had been working for an FBO in Pennsylvania that happened to go bankrupt in 1991. There was a bit of a recession, and I really needed a job. And I reached out to AOPA. I thought it would just be temporary till I found another, job with an FBO. And I ended up getting a job with AOPA on the pilot hotline. We call it the PIC today, the Pilot Information Center, where that was my entry into AOPA. And then I kind of had on-the-job training. I had an aptitude for government affairs work. I went to the FAA Academy in Oklahoma City and took a bunch of classes, and was given the opportunity about a year later to become a research assistant in the government affairs division. And from there, I worked my way through up to vice president of government affairs. And I was in government affairs for most of my career. So up for 27 of my 28 years.
Yeah, I think a lot of the wins we've had as an organization and the members that we've received, all these great advocacy wins, a lot of those have come from you and your team. And I'm not sure many people realize just how entrenched you have been for decades in protecting and preserving our freedoms to fly by, literally getting across the table from the decision makers.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey, I have to tell you. I didn't come into AOPA intending to get in a whole new line of work that was away from actual flying. But when you have an aptitude for something and when you have a passion for something, as you know, because you're a passionate aviator, hard work is rewarding work. And just over time, I really was able to get a foothold in Washington, D.C. of all places, although I used to joke that, hot air, and I have a degree in elementary education, so, and early childhood development. So I kind of the perfect platform for moving into DC politics.
So you were there, and I hope you don't mind me asking about it, but you pretty much camped out at FAA in the days after 9/11 and made sure they didn't ignore GA in opening the airspace back up. Tell us, if you don't mind, a little bit about the days after 9/11 that you literally were down there around the clock.
Sure, and I would say that's probably that was one of the most difficult times, obviously for the world, for the U.S., but also for my career in terms of at that time I was vice president of air traffic, which means anything air traffic related fell into my wheelhouse, and the air traffic system was literally shut down. And so Phil Boyer, our then CEO, the next day after 9/11, called me into his office and said, I want you to go down to the FAA and don't come back till we're flying again. Because we weren't able to really get a lot of traction on the Hill in the early days, because obviously everybody was concerned about where the next threat was coming from. So it wasn't really a political issue. It was really an operational issue at that time. And so I was able to get in the door before they closed the door to anybody outside of the FAA. And I was part of a war room of sorts with top air traffic officials and DOD, all the military, all the security folks. And it was a rough, about 6 weeks. It was a lot of long days and a lot of fighting. And we were able to get to what we call the new normal, which is pretty much what we have today. There's some legacy stuff with large presidential TFRs, and certainly the DC area suffers under the special flight rules. But beyond that, we really were able to roll back a lot of the restrictions that they were wanting to make permanent. So it was a really, really tough time, but a rewarding time, again, to help aviation.
Well, I can't imagine what GA would look like if you hadn't been down there in those harrowing hours after it happened. And that leadership continues now. You've gone out of having to go down to the Hill as often, which I'm sure you're kind of grateful for. Tell me about your new role. We miss you on AOPA Live this week, but now you're doing great things as executive director of the AOPA Foundation.
Sure, and I enjoyed my time on AOPA Live. I was, but also glad to pass the torch and give others the opportunity. You guys are a really great crew. But in November, I took over as the executive director of the AOPA Foundation. We are the philanthropic arm of AOPA. We don't get a single membership dollar. When you join AOPA, we do not get any of that membership, those membership dues. We are funded completely by generous donors. And we fund two really important programs. One is called the Air Safety Institute. So they do all the free safety training. They do in-person e-FERCs and in-person FERCs for flight instructor renewal certificates, and a whole host of other things. We also We also fund You Can Fly, which has 4 distinct programs that are aimed at getting people in the air, getting students in the air, and keeping them flying. We've got our STEM, You Can Fly STEM curriculum for high schools. We've got Rusty Pilots. We've got flying clubs, and we also have scholarships. And so those are the big buckets that we fund, and they're important. And so I'm really happy to be not in Washington, but also to be taking on this new mission where it's going out and getting support for these important programs.
So has COVID-19 impacted you guys in the foundation at all? I know the rest of the building's still hard at work, and you guys are as well. How are things different now that you're not able to travel as much?
Yeah, so when it became clear that this COVID-19 was really going to be a much longer in duration impact on the whole world, we looked at some business contingency planning. And what we found is that, generally speaking, we've changed our messaging a bit because we have to be sensitive to the fact that we are in uncharted waters. However, we found that our donors are passionate about the mission, and that the mission is important, and that the mission goes on. We don't stop what we're doing, and so we don't stop fundraising. And I have to say, we've had a really strong response so far to the message that we have these important programs, and they continue. First of all, like the You Can Fly STEM program, for example, it's an online, all the materials are online. So teachers are teaching today remotely using the STEM program. We're still giving away scholarships. We're going to announce $1 million worth of scholarships that will be awarded by the end of this month to 80 students and 20 teachers that are in the STEM program. We've got the Air Safety Institute. It has migrated everything online. There's no in-person seminars at the moment, but everything's online. There's webinars and all sorts of online content that we're creating, both for the Air Safety Institute and You Can Fly. And that we've actually increased those efforts. So in some ways, we're doing more work than we were when we were in the office.
So obviously some very important programs funded by the foundation, but let's demystify a little things. How can an average guy like me engage with the foundation? I don't have a major gift to give. Are there other levels at which I can come in and step up and say, hey, I want to support this?
There are. It's pretty simple. If you just go to the AOPA Foundation website and click on the donate button, you'll see that we are grateful for any amount that you want to give us. Any from $5 to $25 to $100. We are grateful for every donor dollar, period. That said, there are levels of giving that get you into something called Hat in the Ring. And if you're interested in looking at Hat in the Ring, there's information on there on what you get. That starts at $1,000, and then there's levels that go up from there. So it really depends on what you're comfortable giving and how you want to contribute. But even if you don't contribute any donor dollars, come to AOPA events and come talk to the foundation. We're not going to ask you for money at the event. People always joke, don't, I got to hide my wallet. That's not what it's about. If I've learned nothing else working at the foundation, it really isn't about dollars. It's about relationships. And that's what we're building with our donors, is relationships. And we're engaging them, and we want them more engaged in doing things with and for AOPA. And that's really the key. If you remember nothing else, it's not about getting a dollar out of your wallet. It's about engaging you in our programs.
Absolutely. And I'm proud to be a part of something called the Legacy Society. I've got my first time I've actually had a chance to wear my Legacy Society name badge. And it is a program that has been recently relaunched back in 2015. Why don't you tell folks about the program?
Sure. And thank you. I noticed you were wearing your badge, and I appreciate that. So we relaunched Legacy Society in 2015, and we created Legacy Court at AOPA headquarters. And it's a courtyard with a wall and some other nice features like cherry blossom trees and things like that. And you have to walk past it to get into the AOPA headquarters. And it's there to recognize folks like you, Paul, that have made us a part of your estate plan. And everybody who is part of Legacy Society gets their name on that wall. So it's a really nice way to recognize folks that have remembered us in their estate planning.
And frankly, that wasn't hard at all from my perspective to do. I sent you guys a pledge and then went into my retirement account and designated the AOPA Foundation to get 15% of it on the event of my passing, and codified that with my estate planning with my lawyer. It wasn't hard to do. It didn't take much time, and I feel really good about it, because even though I can't write a major check now, hopefully that will be something that will serve AOPA in the coming decades. So I would encourage people to check that out.
Yeah, one of my goals coming on board the foundation is to really grow that program in 2020 and beyond, because it really helps us sustain the organization long term. So we thank you.
Well, sure. So what's going on right now that people can get engaged with? We have the You Can Fly Challenge each year. Is that still going on despite COVID?
Absolutely. So I mentioned that we have $1 million in scholarships that ties into the You Can Fly program. But beyond that, we have the generous support of the Ray Foundation. The Ray Foundation not only funds the $1 million scholarship, but they do a $2.5 million matching grant for us. They've been doing it for a few years, and they re-upped again in 2020 and committed $2.5 million to AOPA Foundation that if we match that with generous donations from everybody, before August, the end of August is when the challenge ends. If we match the 2.5 million, we will get a total of 5 million from the combined Ray Foundation matching grant. So that's a huge boost in the arm for our STEM program. And our STEM program is in 161 schools, but our vision is long-term. We want to be in 10,000 schools. And so we continue to fund with that goal in mind.
Fantastic. Well, you guys are doing important work down in the AOPA Foundation. I always enjoy catching up with you. I'm sorry we can't do it in the building right now, but it's cool to chat with you here over video chat. And again, if folks want to get plugged in there, you can go right to aopafoundation.org. Melissa, thanks so much for taking some time to chat with me here. It's good to catch up with you, even if it's over the internet.
Exactly. Good to see you again.
All right. Well, take care, and we'll look forward to seeing you back at the headquarters whenever it's all safe too.
Great. Thanks.